Hi everybody and welcome to my channel. In this episode I'm going to be talking about IPPs. Now IPP, for the people that don't know, stands for Indefinite Imprisonment for Public Protection, and this sentence was brought out in 2005 and it was give out to some over 8,500 prisoners. When it was initially brought out, it was only brought out to be given to 1,000 inmates, and it was meant to be kept for the more severe and heinous of crimes, or crimes that didn't merit a life sentence but were bad enough that they needed to be sentenced to IPP, which I've mentioned is an indefinite sentence, which on paper is actually 99 years. So if you get sentenced to an IPP, you serve whatever recommendation they give to you. Like myself, I'm IPP. I was sentenced to 4 years IPP. And you've got to do the recommendation before you even considered for parole. I kept my head down at the end, well, throughout my IPP, and got my courses done. I knew what I had to do. I'm not a daft lad, I'm intelligent, so I knew what I had to do to get out of that situation that I was in, because I didn't want to sit in there rotting for 99 years. And whilst I was in there, I used my time proactively, and I did become a better person. And like I say, some people say, well, you were lucky that you only served 5 years, or wait, 5.5 years of your IPP. But I wasn't lucky. I was unlucky to actually get the IPP because it was my first time in prison. But I was lucky enough to have the brains to be able to change myself whilst I was in there, get the courses done, and use my time proactively and come out a better person. Whereas a lot of the lads that are in there, they haven't got the mental capacity to do what I've done. A lot of them have got learning behaviours, they've got mental health problems, and subsequently, they're in 10 years over tariff. There was one lad recently, he's just been granted parole, Danny Weatherson. He's up in Northumberland. He was 17-year-old when it was an attempted robbery, and he got, I think it was a 19-month IPP. And 17 years later, he's still in prison. He's now 34-year-old, and he's been granted release, so he's waiting to be released, but he's getting released into a hostel. But people, I'm not talking about Danny just here, but people like Danny that have been in over the tariff, is sometimes it's beyond their reach. They can't control what's really happening because they haven't got the intelligence how to be able to write letters. They can't read and write. They're suffering with the mental health, and people like this are getting left behind in the system, and they're not being kept in because they're a danger to the public. They're being kept in because of the mental health. And I'm going to share a video a little bit further on. I'll share a video where this has been brought up again in the House of Commons by the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, and James Darley. James Darley is fighting for IPPs, and he's actually asking the questions in the Houses of Parliament here, what you will see at the end. But again, he's even mentioning, saying some of these lads, there's 1,300 or something he mentions in the video, that are still in, that haven't been released, and the 10 years over tariff. And the reason being, like he's saying, they're not, some of them aren't a danger to the public anymore. It's their mental health, but the mental health has actually suffered and deteriorated because of the IPPs. Now, the IPPs, like I mentioned, it was brought out for the most, not the most serious of crimes, but it was brought out for people that deserved a life sentence, more or less. And a lot of the time, a lot of people that got these sentences hadn't even been to prison before. But I'm not going to get into it and go on and acting as if the prisoners are victims of the IPP, because a lot of people don't like to see that sort of thing. But they actually are, some of them that are in there. A lot of them do. Don't get us wrong. If you see it as, do I agree with IPP or not? I'm actually, because I'm IPP myself, you would think I would just blatantly say no. I don't agree with it. But there is people in prison on IPP that do deserve it, and they should be kept on it, because a lot of them are danger to children. And if someone's a danger to children, then you can't just say that they shouldn't have IPP. But what they should do, and what they are trying to do, is trying to re-sentence everybody individually. And if they re-sentence everybody individually, and some people do still pose a risk of serious harm to the public, then yes, fair enough. You've got to keep them in. You can't just let every single IPP out onto the streets. But there does need to be something happening about it. And there is a lot of things going on behind the scenes. Like I say, James Daly or Darley, however you pronounce it, he's forever in the House of Commons or House of Parliament, whatever you call it, asking questions and fighting for the IPPs and trying to get them resentenced. But this new Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, he seems to know a lot more about it and he seems to be a lot more fair. So I think a lot will be happening shortly with the IPPs. And again, the reason for me doing this video is speaking for people on IPP, speaking for the lads out here in the community that are out here making a difference now. They've changed their lives around. And this IPP is still on their back, still hindering them, still at risk of recall at any point for 99 years. And a lot of things are happening, like I've mentioned, behind the scenes in the Houses of Parliament. So hopefully in the coming years, something will be done with the IPPs and everyone will get a fair shout, get a fair chance at justice, because obviously there's victims involved in all of our crimes that we all committed, and it has to be fair on the victims as well. But there is, like I've mentioned, the IPPs, and I've mentioned this previously in videos previously. The IPPs, I got told of a psychologist in Franklin Prison when I was doing a course, that the IPPs were brought out for sexual predators because the reason they brought it out for them was when they were interviewing predators in Franklin Prison who had normal sentences that were in for harming children, they were blatantly saying that when they were released, they're going to go on and do it again because they can't be changed. So they had to come up with something to stop these people from being released. And they come up with the IPP. But they give the IPP to more non-sexual offences than what they did sexual offences. There's 8,500 IPPs. And I think something like less than 4,000 were given to sexual predators. And the rest were given to people that were in, it was either violence, street robberies, and arson, like things like that, that people have been in, like I've mentioned, over 10 years beyond tariff. But also the IPP doesn't just have a bad effect on the prisoner or even the person out in the community, it affects the whole family. And like James Daly goes on to in this video, when he's talking about the conditions that get put on people, people get put on conditions that have got nothing to do with their offence, and they're making it harder for people out here in the community. Even when the IPPs are released, they've got to spend 10 years in the community without any trouble before they can apply to get the license removed completely. And the way James Daly is talking about it, he actually is talking sense, and he's saying like prisoners or even people out here are feeling like hopelessness because they're thinking, well, they've got 10 years to worry about doing anything wrong, but not even doing anything wrong, having an argument with somebody or just something silly where they're at risk of recall, and it does have a detrimental effect on people's mental health. I mean, luckily I've got a good family support. I'm a working man. I've got a job. I do everything pro-social. I keep myself busy. My life's going well, but there's a lot of people out here that haven't got families. They haven't got the support, and they could end up having drug problems or alcohol problems, and they're going to be finding it really hard. But they can get recalled back to prison through stuff like this if they're not keeping themselves on the straight and narrow and the mental health deteriorates, or they become dependent on alcohol or something like that, then they can be recalled back to prison for non-criminal offences. But I just wanted to bring that up because I know a lot of my subscribers are IPPs and they keep asking, can you do a video on the IPPs? So I'll just try and keep you all up to date as much as possible. But like I say, I am up to date because if you want to follow on Facebook, there's a couple of groups. One is called Ungrip, and this is actually where I've seen the link to this debate in the House of Commons. And there's another IPP called what was it? Sorry. I'll put the links up in the description actually, but it's IPP help for families and different things. I'll put it up. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but I'll put the links in the description. So if you are IPP and you want to go along and join these groups and see like-minded people and try and get help and support, because the people that set these groups up, Donna Mooney is one of them. She set the group up because her brother sadly took his own life in prison on IPP. He was suffering with his mental health and he felt like he couldn't go on no longer. He felt that hopelessness that he couldn't adjust to the sentence any longer. He was getting nowhere. He kept getting knocked back on his parole. His mental health deteriorated that much. He thought everyone was against him in the prison system. They thought the screws were attacking him. And he ended up taking his own life. And Shirley DeBono also set, I think she might have set the group up on Grip, but all of these are in contact with each other. And Sarah Dutton, these ladies are all in touch with each other, helping bring this awareness about the IPPs and trying to get the IPPs out there in the public domain so everybody knows about it, and trying to get the public backing and the public support for people that are still stuck on it. But Shirley's son has been recalled back to prison. He's IPP. He got recalled for something that he never broke the law, and wasn't even an offence that he committed. I can't remember exactly what it was because I've got that much information from different sources. But these women are actually standing up for us IPPs and trying to get justice, trying to fight for us. But again, some people will be watching this and saying, well, what about the justice for the victims? There's help for victims out there. Most of us, especially myself, are remorseful and sorry for what we caused in the past to our victims. But we're moving on with our lives. We're making a difference. And we want this IPP to be rectified and just a chance to live a normal life without this big weight hanging on our backs, dragging us down, and not being able to progress properly in life, knowing that you still have this around your neck, dragging you back. But I think I've covered just about everything, but I will say I mentioned the statistics for the IPPs. There's been over 80 people committed suicide on IPP, and some of these have actually been women that are suffering badly with their mental health. Some of them have even been on suicide watch 24/7, where they've got a glass door. It's a plastic reinforced see-through door where they're on guard 24/7, so they can't take their own lives, they can't harm themselves. And unfortunately, some of these have even been on suicide watch and still managed to kill themselves. I read the story up about one lass, I'll not mention her name, who committed suicide. She was on suicide watch. She was suffering really bad with her mental health. She was 8 years over tariff, so she could have been released 8 years previously, but because her mental health deteriorated, they kept her in prison because of that, and they were using that as an excuse to keep her in prison. Because when she began self-harming and cutting herself, they were saying that when you self-harm in prison, it's an act of violence. So they're still saying you've got violent tendencies, even though you haven't hurt anybody in the prison, and you're only hurting yourself because you can't be released from prison. Then that is now a reason to keep you in prison, because you're using an act of violence on yourself. And these people I've seen firsthand have got big scars up and down their faces. There's one lad in the prison system who's IPP. He's now got the nickname, they call him the Joker, because I think he was about 10 years over tariff, and he was so unhappy, self-harming all the time. He actually carved his face so it looked like he had a big smile on his face. He keeps cutting the same scars. So he's got like a big scar on his face, and they call him the Joker. And that is all to do with the IPP sentence and not being able to be released or get progressed. But now, because these people are self-harming, they're getting kept in because they're using violence, even though it's violence on themselves, and they're using it as a way of releasing. Because when I've asked them before, why do you actually do it? And they said they like to feel the pain, to realize, or for the realization for them, to let them know that they're still alive. Because sometimes they're suffering that bad, they're thinking, am I really here? And when they cut themselves and feel that pain, that's when they know that they're still here. And that is one of the reasons why they're cutting themselves, because of this. But like I mentioned, over 80 people have committed suicide on IPP. And there's over 250 people died on IPP. But I think a larger number is down to suicide. It's just been put down to other causes whilst in the prison system. But I'll put that video on now of the debate in the House of Commons. But I hope you're all enjoying the video, people. I will keep you all updated on the IPPs. And if there is any more topics you want us to cover, drop it in the comments and I'll do it. Take care, people, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And that will be at Secretary of State. That's okay. You said, and forgive me if the terminology is wrong, that the IPP is staying on the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Recent prison population data shows that on the 31st of March 2023, there were 1,355 offenders serving an IPP sentence who had never been released from prison. of those, 641 people have been in prison for more than 10 years longer than their tariff, including 189 people whose original tariff was less than 2 years. Do you think a political system should allow somebody who's received a 2-year tariff to potentially serve over 40 years in prison?
I have probably said more lurid words of condemnation about IPPs than any other Secretary of State. I think they were, I reiterate that they're a stain on the justice system and a stain on the conscience of the justice system. The really difficult, and I should say, by the way, I've read your report, which I thought was very interesting. We'll go on, no doubt, to talk about some of the recommendations in it. I'm particularly interested in recommendation 8, which the government initially opposed, and we'll just have perhaps a discussion about that if that indeed is your will. But I just want to say that, just stepping back for a second, the difficulty for a Secretary of State, who of course has to keep the public safe, is you've got this conundrum that people who were deemed dangerous in the first place, in other words, a judge was satisfied that this was a qualifying offence and this person was dangerous, either because it was a particularly appalling knife point robbery and so on, then because they remain in custody, potentially that has damage some individuals, bluntly, because they've not got out each time. There's a sense of hopelessness, and yet that person could potentially become more dangerous as a result of what has taken place. Now that is a matter of injustice, but it also means that if that person is out on the street, that potentially causes a risk to your family or your parents or your children, and so that's something that has to be considered. But we have a solemn duty to do everything we can and to devote the resources we can to try to ensure these individuals can progress through the justice system whilst never losing sight of our duty to protect the public. And that's why, we've got this action plan which we can go through in as much detail, but effectively it's got 4 principles, 6 work streams, but boldly and bluntly, the aim is to reduce the number of people serving an IPP sentence, and I'm interested in some of the recommendations in your report.
Well, I think you just touched on the point that I was going to make, that there is very clear evidence which is contained within our report, and I think from every professional body who's been involved in this, that mental deterioration with the nature of this sentence is linked very closely.
Yeah.
What my concern, Lord Chancellor, is that we are getting away from people being a threat to the public and keeping people locked up because they've got mental health conditions. And the differential between those two statements is perhaps a nuanced one, but I don't know whether you agree with me or not. I think some of those 1,355 offenders are not a threat, and I think they are in there because of the impact this sentence has had on them, the mental deterioration it has brought, and we cannot surely be in a position where, because people are unable, without, I don't know how to describe it, people who, because of, I mean, it's stark. If you're in prison for 10 years longer than your tariff, it's bound to have an impact on you. You're not going to be a person who is, how can I put it? I hesitate to say this, but normal in the normal sense of it. You're not going to be able to go out and just suddenly walk into a job and everything's going to be all right. And that really concerns me, Lord Chancellor, that we are locking these people up because they've got mental health problems rather than them posing a threat or a risk. If you've been in prison for over 10 years longer than what the original sentence should have been, I cannot see where the threat to the public comes from that.
Yeah, well, I agree with the thrust of what you're saying, but I have a slightly different view on the details. So it is certainly the case that having people serving 10 years over tariff is very concerning to anyone who's got a basic sense of right and wrong, point 1, I think. But point 2, on the issue, I agree that plenty will have mental health problems. Point 3, I accept that those, in some cases, a lot of cases, may well have been exacerbated by the experience that they've had. Where I depart from your logic, however, is sitting here in the Grimond room in Parliament to actually form a view as to whether that person is or is not dangerous. Now, that has to be a decision for the professional parole board, considering psychologist evidence, psychiatrist evidence, their offender management evidence. And what we cannot avoid is that the judge at first instance decided that person was dangerous, and bear in mind that was on the basis of psychiatric and probation officer evidence whenever it was in 2004 or whatever, decided that person was dangerous, and that each parole board review, the parole board has decided that person is not safe to be released. What I cannot do is supplant my judgment for the judgment of that problem. So, but that is not a counsel of despair. Okay, that's not a counsel of despair. It's not me saying, okay, well, brilliant. Well, it's just one of those things. We'll just have to let people suffer and cuss it. No. But you haven't let me finish. That's why I'm absolutely determined that you've got to get them in a position where they are safe to be released with an extremely aggressive and intensive plan, this action plan, with its 4 principles, with its 6 work streams, not just about publishing data, but ensuring that every IPP sentenced prisoner has a sentence plan. It's not just saying, broadly what needs to happen, but specifying the particular interventions that are required to reduce the risk in that particular case. And not just that, to ensure that when they come out, they are getting the support so that there isn't the merry-go-round to go back in. Because as you rightly pointed out, there are more now people on recalled IPPs than there are on original sentences.
You see, again, that's where... Just one more question. Yeah, sure. But then that, again, the recall is again, a fault within the system. And we've heard evidence in camera and out of it that when these people are released, the conditions that are put on them, in many cases, don't have any relationship to the alleged threat they pose to the public. And when you're somebody who has been in prison for a long time comes out, it is a difficult transition for them, let alone whether there's a threat or not, to actually survive in society. Now, if you're asking people to report regularly to a police station or something else like that, and they're not able to do that because they have not yet developed those organisation skills or human skills because they've been in prison for a long time, we are sending people back into prison who are not actually committing further offences and are not posing a threat as a result of that. And again, that's how can we do that?
I think it's very dangerous there are issues with generalising. I understand why you make the point as you do. But this goes back actually to an earlier conversation we're having about probation officers. It's when you skill up those probation officers to make sensible decisions. So if that person missed that appointment, is that genuinely reflecting a risk that this person is about to go and knife someone? Because if they are, they should be back inside, I'm afraid. We have to keep the public safe. Or is it because, actually, do you know what? The relationship, they haven't rekindled their relationship on the outside, but actually we can stabilise it, or there's an issue that they haven't got their mental health treatment or their medication in proper balance, and so they can take a view. That requires finely balanced decisions. But if I may, I do just want to address, if you're interested, where I think we ought to, there is stuff for us to think about carefully. In your recommendation 8, you were looking at the fact that at present, after 10 years, it used to be the case that they would have to apply, but now there was an automatic referral for 10 years for consideration. Now, one of the things you suggested, or whether the licence should be dropped, because it hangs over people like a sword of Damocles, and people can't, and that's about the hopelessness thing. Like, even if I get out, this is going to be hanging over me for 10 years. I might be dead then. They want to think that they can get past it. That's an important part of it. And so, one of the things you recommended in your recommendation 8 is, look, is that period too long? Should it be 5 years? And I want you to know that I'm looking very carefully at this. It's something that was initially rejected. It does seem to me that there is merit in what you have written as a committee, if I may respectfully say so, and that is getting a very careful and developed consideration. I think it's probably as far as I can take it.
I think we're grateful for that and for the tone.